ERP go-lives don't fail overnight. The warning signs are usually there long before launch. Today on the ERP Perspective, I'm joined by Gabor Fulop, CEO of ControlledGo-Live, for a powerful discussion on why ERP readiness is being measured wrong and how poor decision-making creates risk long before systems go live. We're talking the illusion of green status reports, why readiness is more than hitting milestones, the hidden risks leaders aren't challenging, and what organizations must measure before go live. If you work on ERP transformation, you do not want to miss this one. Good morning, Gabor. Welcome to the ERP Perspective.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Great to have you on the show. I know we've been speaking for a good couple of weeks. You've been sharing a lot of exciting things with me. But before we get into the podcast and obviously our topic today, which is Go Live is not a date, why ERP readiness needs to be measured before it's too late. I think that's a fantastic topic. But before we get into that, tell us a bit more about who Gabor is and what your background is.
Well, I'm going to go back in time for a bit just because I kind of have an unusual start to my career. It was 1991 and I couldn't get a job in Boston due to a recession, but I heard they were looking for accounting people in Hungary. So I moved to Budapest, Hungary. I bought a one-way ticket, 2 suitcases, moved to Hungary and started interviewing with some CPA firms, ended up at Price Waterhouse teaching accounting and finance in English and Hungarian. And then later I ended up at GE Lighting Systems at one of the largest light bulb factories in the world. And that's kind of how I got into manufacturing and supply chain management, as well as process improvement like Six Sigma, demand flow technology, and actually had some really interesting projects working with the mechanics in the shops, improving their processes. So it's not the usual start coming from accounting, getting into manufacturing, but it was something I was very passionate about. I was very excited when presented the opportunity at GE. And that's really what changed the direction of my career. And during that time in process improvement, one of the things that really got to me was there were many times that we wanted to improve a process and the response from IT was no, for one reason or another, not later, not even a maybe. They were just like, no, we can't do it. Or it's too costly. We're not going to be able to do it or things like that. And that's when I was like, wait a second, I'm trying to improve processes and I can't. So I'm going to go to the source. I'm going to start working with IT. And that's essentially what I did. I got a master's in information systems management after my MBA and really wanted that specialty about information systems management. I also got ITIL certified, which is ITIL, the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, actually at TaylorMade Adidas Golf, another really cool company where I was for 7 years and was manager of finance systems there, working with Oracle Financials at the time. So I know that's a lot of history and maybe more information that you wanted, but what I kind of wanted to call out was that mix of accounting, finance, and analytics with manufacturing, process improvement, inventory management, complex manufacturing, scheduling and planning, managing cycle times, managing changeover times. To be able to get that balance between efficiency and meeting customer demand. So it's been an amazing opportunity that I had in my career to kind of take this path. And in 2012, I dedicated myself to Microsoft Dynamics 365. I wanted to focus exclusively on one system, become razor sharp in the functionality and the capabilities. And so the last 14 years, I've been exclusively working with Microsoft. Even before that time, I saw a lot of project failures and I always followed the articles and reading about project failures. And over time, I kind of became the rescue guy for a lot of projects. When consultants get kicked out and they're desperate for someone that can get along with the client, that's when they call me and they'll pull me in. And after a couple of weeks, they're like, yeah, I'm not working with anyone else but Gabor because he understands me. He understands the business. He can explain functionality in a way that makes sense to me as a business person. So I see the difference between a customer that's struggling to understand an ERP implementation versus a customer who's like, okay, I see the light. I understand it now. I don't have to implement every single piece of functionality. I just need to achieve certain business objectives. And I've always been very big about working directly with the end users, understanding what they need. And that's a common message, you see in a lot of these coaches. But then I wanted to take it a level further because I saw all these programs that are still failing. Even after decades of lessons learned, organizations continue to struggle with these ERP projects. And being the guy to come in and rescue, and I know I'm not the only one, but as one of those guys, I've seen the failures. I ultimately end up understanding the root cause. I won't know it on day one, but as I get to know the business, as I get to work with them, as I see how they operate as a team, as I see how they treat an ERP project as an IT project rather than a business project, things like that, all those typical symptoms that we read about on LinkedIn articles are all there. And I've seen them firsthand. And so that's kind of what drove me to develop my program governance framework. And that framework is basically like a checklist. By the way, it reminds me of a great book, Checklist Manifesto. I love that book. And that's kind of what was my inspiration for Controlled Go Live.
I think it's a really interesting background right from the start of your career. I mean, going to Hungary with a one-way ticket's quite bold to take that risk, and then how that's transformed. And then obviously in 2012, where you've been exposed to the world of Microsoft Dynamics, and it sounds like you've not looked back since, been so passionate about that particular ERP system and become an expert in helping those looking to implement it and facing the challenges that they've had. But I mean, it sounds like your background essentially for the last, I mean, probably longer, but the last 14 years in particular, you've been helping these organizations not just deliver their ERP go live successfully, but also bring in the structure, accountability, as you mentioned there. When you're going into a business, you can see what's wrong. It could be the structure, the accountability, and obviously that clarity to decision making, which it sounds like most people make far too late.
Exactly. Yeah, and your great segue to what I call decision drift. And that essentially is someone authorized the project, right? And these projects are millions of dollars in license, consulting fees, internal resources that you have to either beg, borrow, or steal from the business to be dedicated to the project. Getting business process leaders involved, even executive involvement, all takes time and focus and ultimately cost. And so who's approving that cost? Usually the CFO, maybe even the entire board. And then ultimately it's up to the CFO and or CIO typically to execute. And they're focused on cost and budget because those are the typical metrics, right? Are my tasks getting completed? But we really don't have any good quality measurement, quality control around, the task completion for one thing. Although hopefully if you've got good architects, that's the kind of thing they should be looking at, and your middle IT management hopefully is looking at that sort of thing. But even beyond that, even if they're looking at it, if you don't talk to the entire team, anyone and everyone that's involved with the decisions being made in a project, how do you know what they know? And what I mean by that is, do they even know what best practices are? Do they know what a risk is and how to escalate it? Do they know that if a decision is being made, that it needs to be documented and the right people need to take ownership of it? For some folks, it may not matter as much if you're, just a functional consultant from the vendor, but at the same time, you're a witness to what's happening as these decisions are being made in these meetings that the executives can't be at. Business process owners often won't be there. You've got all these different people in different working sessions making decisions. And it's essentially in a black hole, right? I mean, some companies are starting to document decisions through, let's say, a decision work item type in ADO, but it's not a major focus. Surprisingly, even some things like metrics, OKRs, objectives and key results, or KPIs, or Six Sigma, DMAIC metrics, whatever you want to use to control your processes, ultimately they all cascade, or should cascade, right, top down, to achieving the overall objectives of the business. Are they doing that? Do the different team members have the same understanding of what the strategic direction of the business is, and the project in particular, what the goals of the project are? One of the stories I share, maybe a bit too often, but I had a CFO pushing really hard for a particular capability, and I challenged him because I felt it was a very costly and risky and unnecessary development. It would have a lot of cost, testing, ownership, but it was a fixed price project, so he wanted as much functionality in the system as possible. I said, but it's not supporting your business objectives. It's just a reporting thing. It related to days sales outstanding. And he wanted it built into D365. And I said, you can get the same thing out of Power BI. You can get it in the reporting later. You don't need it in the system. What's the business value? And he could not articulate what that business value was, just that he wants it. He wants to be able to report on it. I say, well, you can report on it. It's just on a different layer. So those are the types of decisions, even at the executive level, if it's made in a vacuum without other functional leaders being involved, they could force work, direction that is not in the best interest of the program.
I mean, there's several topics there, which I think you're 100% right with. I mean, first of all, when you mentioned regarding that standard, people don't know what the standard are. They don't know what the risks are. And we see so many people shouting from the rooftops, we need this global standard. We need this local standard. This is what we need as a business. But if the people don't know what that standard is, then how can a business be operating at that level, or people be aware of how to, follow that? And your story about the CFO there, and I'm sure many people have had something similar when people are so adamant that this is right for the business. But I think your rule is 100% spot on. If you can't articulate the value add for the business, then why spend all of that money on a new system just for the title or just for the label when it's not going to actually benefit the business in any way? I think that someone would sign that off. On the go live side of things, I know many businesses, it is still treated as a date in most ERP programs, rather than sort of a decision about being ready or that readiness aspect. Why is that still the case?
So the challenge is that there's assumptions being made when you look at project status reports and readiness, and it really depends on the discipline that the organization has. So they might have metrics around user acceptance testing is 100% complete, no P1s, manageable number of P2s, and maybe some post-go-live, month-end close items. That's like a typical exit gate or rule that we can exit this phase if we achieve certain milestones. But ultimately, there are people making decisions about test cases, test scenarios, test results that could be completely contradictory, meaning test cases and scenarios could be missing, or something that was perceived to be okay was actually not, or accounting never reviewed the voucher, or whatever. There's always some kind of miss because the same level of ownership on those test plans and test executions, same thing with designs and any deliverables within the program. That level of ownership, today, it's occasionally you'll see a RACI, usually not. It'll be, go to John for this, go to Sally for that, right? Oh, make sure you keep John informed over there. Very rarely do you see a formal RACI where, okay, I actually know where to look to see who do I need to keep informed, who needs to be consulted, and is anybody verifying that those people actually signed off on those results? Is it by meeting? We get together, okay, we executed 98%, we got a couple of bugs, but are we good? Yeah, we're good. Okay, let's move on. Check, it's done. But meanwhile, if you've got business process leaders not engaged or pockets of resistance in certain areas, you can see this in different ways. Sometimes it's a functional area. Sometimes it's a regional area where one area just isn't keeping up. They're not attending the meetings. They're not involved. And you may not know that because they're just an invitee. If you're not taking roll call and checking and asking questions and making sure people are engaged, but then if you're doing that, it's much harder to get through the actual meeting that you're trying to hold and the goal you're trying to achieve. So how do you ensure that ownership? How do you prevent day-to-day decisions drifting from the original strategic intent of that ERP program? And ultimately, I kind of got the idea from ProSci Change Management. I'm a huge fan of ProSci. It's basically the main kind of methodology concept is ADKAR, which is awareness, desire, knowledge, and reinforcement of the change or abilities. So it's all about the end user changing, and you survey the end users to make sure they're being given training, they understand the why. They know what's in it for me. They're being given training. They're being given access to a training environment. They're being given time and encouraged by their management to go train. All these survey questions shed light on who's engaged and involved. And non-responses are actually a response too. If someone's not responding, then they're completely ignoring your program. And so there's so much power and information available through that. And I kind of took that methodology and said, well, I've developed this program governance framework. And by the way, that governance framework is all common knowledge. It's PMI, project management. It's business process management methodologies and the Microsoft Business Process Catalog that they've been really developing to try and streamline implementations by structuring the requirements gathering and aligning that with configurations and design. I mean, the best practices around Microsoft tools alone is massive. Then you've got regulatory requirements. Are you GAP, IFRS, SOX, FDA, ISO, whatever quality, etc. I mean, just any one alone, like SOX, for example, if you're not including that in your planning on day one, you're too late. You can't wait till go live to account for SOX, as an example. And so these pillars in my governance framework take us as a team through all the main pillars of potential requirements and areas of focus that we need to have as a program team. The survey questions, there's some questions that are targeted at specific categories like the PMO, the architect, the executive steering committee, executive leadership steering committee, and then the program team. And by that, I mean everyone else that works in the program. That could be system integrator, could be contractors, could be your subject matter experts. Hopefully you have some dedicated from the business, and your business process leaders, the people who are supposed to be signing off on the transformation of processes, and so on. So you've got these categories of users and you ask them these questions, as well as some common questions that are across all roles. And very quickly, you're going to see a clear picture of where is there alignment and where is there a gap. And by gap, I mean either decisions not being documented, decisions being held up, sitting, in a bottleneck because, someone's out on family leave or someone's focused on hitting their numbers or whatever it is. You can get these decision bottlenecks or decisions being made in a vacuum because those people aren't available, those sorts of things. So by surveying the program team members, and understanding how they're making decisions, escalating decisions, ensuring accountability of decisions, making sure decisions are aligned with strategic objectives, making sure that best practice deviations are documented or best practices are followed, best practices are known. All these things can quickly become identified, and then you can take corrective action.
Yeah.
But if you don't find out till you're, going live, which I was shocked. I just saw an article from Eric Kimberling this morning on LinkedIn. Another example of a huge failure. Within 6 months, they went from green to massive losses, right? So they waited too long and they went live and they had inaccurate inventory numbers. Now, how do you get to inaccurate inventory numbers? Either poor testing, poor design and build, loss of focus on certain aspects. Something was obviously significantly missed, and somewhere someone knew that. And because there was a disconnect between the steering committee, the focus on managing risk and success got disconnected from, I got to complete this task, so I'm going to make a decision, or I'm just going to move forward, or whatever it is. Something there was clearly disconnected.
100%. I mean, I think using something like ControlledGo-Live, I mean, what you've shown me with ControlledGo-Live, I think would help a lot with those scenarios before people go from that green status to, I wouldn't even say red. The example there, I also saw the article this morning, and it's really damaging for the business and has really dramatic outcomes that could be detriment to the business surviving. I mean, with ControlledGo-Live, I guess this helps leaders understand what ready for go live actually means. And on the side, when leaders say a program is ready, I know we discussed this briefly previously when you were mentioning there was typically a few things missing from that view. And what are leaders currently basing on the term ready? What are they basing on that at the moment? And how do they end up missing the things that you mentioned?
Well, again, personally, I believe it comes down to delivery pressure, right? Hitting a date that we committed we would hit this date, so we're going to hit this date, versus that quality and thoroughness and depth of really understanding what's behind that. And some people say, well, that's the PMO's fault, or it's this business process leader's fault, or whatever. You can always find someone to blame if you want. But the whole point is that through ensuring that you incorporate all elements of best practices in your program management, and then measuring your team's ability, willingness, desire, and the actual end result, is that those decisions are documented. When people are held accountable for their decisions, they're going to be a heck of a lot more careful and involved versus if there's some email floating around that, 6 months, 12 months later gets archived, is almost impossible to find about who signed up for something. So even if the decision was made, was it properly documented in such a way that those people are visibly being held accountable? Do they know they're being held accountable? I mean, in some cases, maybe they're being asked their opinion, but they don't know that that's now a decision. That's another aspect related to this where, well, I think it should be like this. And 6 months later, oh, you built it? That was just some thoughts. I've seen thoughts turn into requirements without any vetting, without any, cross-functional discussion. And people are like, why did you do that way, right? So that it takes longer to do it right the first time, but it takes even longer to do it twice.
100%. And I think it's that risk that's building up from not taking that accountability, not having that structure. And you are right. It's that time that you take in phase 0 or before going live is going to increase your chances of success and hopefully not create more work further down the line when there is a failure or there is a problem. And in sort of that run up to the go live where risk can build up, where do you see most often the risk building that isn't being properly serviced or challenged, as you mentioned there? It sounds like the accountability or the people aren't being challenged of who's taking ownership of those different topics.
Yeah. So risk management is an interesting topic in and of itself because I'll see sometimes they'll have a risk work item type in ADO, so they have a way to capture risks, or they might have a risk register in SharePoint or maybe even an Excel file somewhere. But how many programs have a discipline review, monthly and quarterly reviews of your, ones and twos, right? Your highest priority, most severe risks, and are actively working on mitigation plans, mitigation responses, and things like that. The best projects that I see, meaning the most successful, have taken the time even to do a failure mode and effects analysis where they actually brought in extra resources from the parent company to help run this analysis because the program team was so burdened with the program work. But they were like, okay, how do we truly assess risk? And they're like, well, let's do a FMEA or FEMA analysis, failure modes and effects analysis. And they dug deep and looked at all the potential failures and then actively worked that over the next 6 months to make sure that whether it was through design, training, contingency plans, whatever, all those risks were mitigated. And that's just one example of a best practice that the best run programs follow those best practices across all of the pillars, starting from project management, change management, business process management, and statutory regulatory requirements. If you don't clearly understand those requirements and the effort and the dedication needed from inside the business, if those resources aren't made available, then people start making decisions without the right information or not the right people making the decision, etc. So again, it all comes back to everything is about decisions, whether it's a design topic, a test case selection, making it mandatory or not, who tests it, whether it's a pass or fail, etc. All these things are micro decisions that over time can build up and burden a program. But if you're kind of on the pulse of the team on a monthly basis, communicating with the team through the ControlledGo-Live survey or decision drift assessment survey, by doing that, you can understand and see those. Like, for example, you ask executives, are they actively managing decision bottlenecks? And they say, oh, yes, we are. But then down in the weeds, you ask similar question, are decisions being made in a timely basis? And all of a sudden they're like, no, we've been waiting for weeks, right? You've got this disparity in the same topic between different roles within the program. That's going to shed light on, okay, we got to do something. Either we're not seeing the decision bottleneck, or, decisions are being escalated, or, whatever, something is disconnected there. And that gives you that clue that shines that light so we can go look at the right aspects of program management and governance.
Sounds like obviously decision making is the real big risk of these go lives. But how does it compare to the technology or delivery? If you had to compare the three in sort of percentages, let's say, would you say it's 100% decision making or very close to?
Well, the tool is just a tool, right? If I use the hammer to hit my thumb versus hit the nail, it's still a hammer. So
Yeah.
it's not the technology. It's all about people and how we adopt the system, how we design the system, what we focus on, what we prioritize, making sure that not only do we know all the different aspects of why we're doing this and how we need to make it tightly controlled, and just looking at ITIL alone, ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Library, it's really about system change management. ProSci is about organizational change management. ITIL is about system change. That in itself has so many requirements around having the right people in place, the decisions they make around deploying code, the regulatory and documentation requirements around it. In all aspects, the leadership has to understand the impacts to their organization and the people working that system. Every single team in the company changes, including IT, including accounting, finance, operations, warehouse people, manufacturing people. Everyone's impacted by this kind of program. And if you don't have that connection between the highest level leaders who are guiding and driving the ship versus the people down in the weeds making day-to-day decisions, you're going to end up with that disconnect. It comes back to those decisions, like you said.
In your experience, Gabor, why do so many programs look green on sort of that status reporting right up until then final stages? And then what does that say about how the readiness maybe was being measured in that project?
I'm going to share a little story. So I was interviewing for a role once, and the CIO said, we've already missed 2 go lives. And in my head, I was thinking, they were ready to go live, but then they pulled the plug because testing wasn't done or something like that. Well, it took me longer than I should have, but come to find out, they hadn't even finished a conference room pilot. So I think there's just such a huge disconnect between people who run businesses and people who run programs. And when you're in the business responsible for these programs, but you don't live in these programs day in and day out, you just don't understand. You just don't know what to focus on. And that's why something like ControlledGo-Live is so powerful, because it starts with the framework and then asks the team members how well, but they're basically self-assessing, hey, how well are we doing against these best practices? So unfortunately, all I can say to answer your question is it's hard to learn those lessons. It's hard to read. There is so much content. If I was a CIO or CFO and it's my first ERP program, I've never run one before, and you start trying to read about it, there's just so much content and lots of warnings about do this, do that, have the right business metrics, have the right governance, have the right project manager, have the right subject matter experts, have the right implementation partner, choose the right software. All these things, there's just so much pressure on these executives to make these things happen, and yet if you haven't been there and done that, it's so much content, it's difficult to absorb it all and be able to account for it all. And then, of course, there's just competing priorities, right? That's the other element of ProSci that I really like, is that you're also looking, well, what if this ERP program is not the only change going on? What if you're downsizing or growing rapidly or acquiring other businesses or developing new product lines or whatever it is as a business? Your teams are now distracted by multiple big priorities, and an ERP program is one of the more temporary ones versus some of the others. and yet it probably requires the most time and the most cross-functional discussion, which ultimately can be really good for the business. But if the people don't show up, if the leadership isn't driving it, if those lessons learned about involvement and best practices, if those aren't incorporated, you're gonna have misses. You're gonna pay more or get less value out of the system because of the misses.
Yeah, 100%. If milestones and status aren't enough, what should organizations be measuring to genuinely understand sort of go live readiness?
Well, first of all, let me make it clear. I absolutely do think that tasks and planning and everything else that is part of the best practices of PMI, project management, Microsoft's, I forget the name of their design document that talks about best practices in design, their business process, all these things are critical to leveraging and measuring so that you can track progress. You have to have your test cases, your test scenario, all that stuff, your project schedule, your tasks assigned in ADO, etc. All that is critical. But in addition, we have to measure decision drift. So to what degree? Because, I mean, at this point, it's hard to say that there isn't some decision drift in every program, right? There's got to be always at least some. Very few programs hit the mark 100%. So how early can you identify components of decision drift? Like I said, the bottlenecks, the lack of accountability, the delays, whatever it is, the lack of communication around best practices, the lack of communication around the strategic direction of the program and the priorities of, what's the most important functionality. That all of that comes down to these decisions and understanding the accountability and ownership of those decisions, the documentation of those decisions. And if they're documented, if people are being held accountable, then people are going to be more involved. And if you measure that, that it's truly happening across the organization, then it'll happen. But as we know, typically it's never 100%. And so this will help identify those issues before.
Yeah. And if you were making a prediction, for ERP programs obviously continue to treat go live as a milestone instead of a decision, what do you think organizations will keep getting wrong in the next 5 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, AI is where it's all about right now, right? So garbage in, garbage out. If you allow your organization to scale leveraging AI without good governance, you're going to be basically risking exponential failures where essentially your internal control weaknesses can be built into the systems, built into the AI-based platform, and you could completely lose control of your system. So in the next 5 years, it's only going to get worse if the program governance does not improve, because we'll be accelerating even more, going faster, and, achieving greater results, which is great. I do anticipate that. But at the same time, if we don't control that deployment of that functionality, you're deploying risk at scale. You're exponentially increasing your risk.
And I mean, I think for any business with the implementation of AI in the next 5 years, like you said, you're going a lot faster, but you're probably going faster with no brakes. And if that is the case, then, chaos could happen, especially if you put garbage in, garbage out, as you mentioned. But I mean, it's been a great topic to talk about, obviously, why go live is not just a date and why ERP readiness needs to be measured before it's too late. Before we wrap up this episode, I know obviously Controlled Go Live, you've got a lot of interesting things planned this year. What are the current topics at the moment? And do you have any upcoming releases at Controlled Go Live?
Yeah, so we're just now releasing the application for basically conducting the surveys at the speed of light. I mean, all we need is a list of email addresses and their roles, out of the 5 roles that I mentioned. You can add their functional area if you'd like. Basically, we can very quickly send out these surveys and collate the results, instant feedback, leveraging AI for our performance reporting. It'll quickly shed the light on where you are. So within hours and days, basically how quickly you can follow up with your people to make sure they complete the survey, you can very quickly get a clear picture of where your program stands. So it's really exciting. I'm super pumped to get this out there. Help companies improve their ERP programs so that, although I'm personally focused on Microsoft Dynamics, really this tool could be used in any ERP or even legacy system environment to understand how does your team work effectively together? Are they documenting decisions? Are they holding people accountable? Are things happening quickly? We can answer those questions very, very quickly to shine a spotlight in a new way, in a way that no one else has ever done before. And so it's exciting to see the results from that and how it's going to make these organizations' programs far more successful. And I personally believe it'll actually significantly improve their cross-functional collaboration over time. And that's a critical part of digital transformation. That's another topic we didn't talk about, is that digital transformation is not just about implementing software. It's about updating your business processes so that you take advantage of best practices, again, that are known, but also about understanding what's different about your business, what's truly a competitive advantage, and then focus your development budget and your additional cross-functional time on those key topics that are truly value add from a competitiveness perspective. So it's really exciting to see the potential and to start working with companies on this and see those positive results.
I know you personally, Gabor, and you are one of the most passionate people in the ERP space that I know. I'd highly recommend anybody watching this episode of the ERP Perspective to please follow Gabor, have a look at what he's doing with ControlledGo-Live. I will link some more details around Gabor and ControlledGo-Live below this video, so feel free to go and check that out. But this has been Go-Live is Not Just a Date with the CEO of ControlledGo-Live, Gabor Fulop. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, George. It's been an incredible pleasure. And I just look forward to working with folks, meeting folks, networking, and talking about. Like you said, I am very passionate about helping these companies be successful in their ERP programs. And I look forward to working with your followers.